All right, we now have a presentation by Alton. Just kind of stand in this area over here. Okay, let's get started. Is it working?
No. Can you use this? No.
Now try it. Should work.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, cool. Okay, my name's Alton. I had to do chapter 1 in the Lee book. So chapter 1 was all about the rise of Nazism and the various influences that were going on in Germany at the time that allowed for Nazism to really take a hold in Germany. So before I really dive into it, the book kind of laid out in its first couple pages a background of what the Nazi movement was, where it originated, how it came about. Originated in Munich. It started out as a German Workers' Party, established immediately after World War One, which Germany in World War One was a very difficult place to live due to the sanctions that were on them on the Treaty of Versailles. And during this time period, also later on, you see the impact economically of the Great Depression and things like that just shatter the German worker and make it almost impossible to live there. In 1919, Hitler joined the German Workers' Party and was put in charge of propaganda. And once Hitler joined the party, he really kind of took hold of it. And in 1920, it was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And the rebranding and the growth of the party was mainly contributed to Hitler. The Munich Putsch, I think is what it's called, is where Hitler tried to seize power, but that revolution failed, and it was at that moment that Hitler, and the National Socialist German Workers' Party decided to achieve their goals by legal means, and so over time you see, and here this last bullet point is kind of how you see the party grow into the 1930s. I talked about the economic hardships of the Great Depression and the division of the working class, of how the German people were just looking for somebody to unify them. And so they really found that in this party, because by 1932 they had 107 seats in the German parliament, and that by far made them the largest party in the country. So this party was basically founded on National Socialism. That was the branding, that was their ideology. And National Socialism can really be summed up through 3 major works. The 25-point program has 25 points on what the party stood for and what National Socialism meant. And I can't really go through each point with you individually because that would take a really long time. But the whole book, or the whole written work, was full of principles that were both nationalist and socialist. And the nationalist idea called for the unity of all the German people for a stronger and greater, more powerful Germany. One of the ways they achieved this was through racial slants, especially towards the Jews. But the socialist ideas kind of had a theme of, if you don't work, then you're not going to be valued in society. So you just see a spike in the value of physical and mental work due to the ideas that are laid out in the 25-point program. And then you see Mein Kampf, which everybody knows about. That's Hitler's work, and it's another national socialist idea. But it tends to focus more on racial explanations for Germany's downfall, more so than economic issues. Its main point is how ancient civilizations deteriorate due to their races becoming impure, and a lot of this is credited to and Hitler talks about in it crediting a lot of that impurity to the Jews in Germany at this time. I don't know how to say this correctly, but Zotzbuch or whatever. The book didn't really talk about it much, but it was another major work, and it was written after Mein Kampf by Hitler as well. And it focused more on what the German foreign policy was, and so it didn't really dive into it as much, but that was also one of the major points. So the Sonderweg, or the special path, in the book it talks about how three different reasons why Germany was probably susceptible to National Socialism. Um, One of the reasons was the failure of the German middle class to capture political initiative in 1848 and 1849. The reason for this is the German people, the middle class, as you can see later on, where Hitler starts to shift his focus away from the working class to the middle class. The middle class had a lot of power in Germany during this time period, and they just all they needed to do was really seize the initiative and make the government the way that they wanted to. But they another reason that this didn't work out was because the German people had a tendency to surrender to authority almost. And so instead of capturing initiative and taking and leading the people taking the initiative, they really just kind of followed what their leaders were doing and didn't really seize that power. And this allowed German liberalism to fracture. And with liberalism fracturing, National Socialism began to kind of seep into their democracy because members of this party started to win seats, and then all of a sudden these ideas wouldn't go away because you had to hear them out because you're in a democracy. And but this whole idea of these being the only reason Germany was susceptible to it is pretty restrictive, and most historians don't really limit it to just that, because you have to keep in mind the economic influences as well. And both Marxist and non-Marxist historians agree with that. Okay, so the main reason the Nazi Party or the German Workers' Party comes into prominence is Hitler. You cannot separate Hitler from the Nazi Party, because unlike Mussolini in Italy, where you really would have this fascist uprising probably regardless, Nazism needed Hitler for it to make it. The book talks about the whole idea of Hitlerism is the same as Nazism, and how just Mussolini and just how strong the German government the German government was much more stable than the Italian government at this time. So even though Nazism would have gained a foothold without a strong leader to infiltrate into the government or lead the people from the front, it wouldn't have made the same headway. It talked about the idea of the Führer principle, and once again, that's just another way of saying without Hitler, it's just there was no rise of the Nazi Party. Once again, crucial ideas to Nazism. In countries that were in the state of Germany at this time, like that were in the economic and political state of Germany, that kind of breeds this whole idea of a radical leader. And Hitler took that, and he was definitely radical in a lot of his ideas, but the way he presented it was very compelling. And one of the reasons it was compelling is just because he was a master of propaganda, and he was a master of speaking, and he knew how to tug at the German people's heartstrings to get them to see things his way. But another major reason is the German people were very, very receptive to what Hitler had to say. They were not they were looking for a way out, and because of the receptiveness, it really multiplied the effectiveness of Hitler's speaking. Okay, so extending the Nazi support. Like I mentioned earlier, Hitler originally hoped to come to power by direct action, but the Munich Putsch failed, and he was sentenced and had to step out of the public scene. But once he came back onto the scene, you have to really commend Hitler and the party for the patient approach that they decided to take after that, because they really wanted to emulate Mussolini in Italy, but they realized that wasn't going to work. So they decided to take the next best approach and take it by the legal means. And how they did this is they moved away from the narrow working class focus of the original German Workers' Party and began to, because they wanted to compete against the moderate Social Democrats and the Communists, which were the other two major parties on the scene at the time. So how they did this, they moved into it and started attacking socialism a little bit. They wanted to make an appeal to the middle class and the conservatives, who were pretty undecided at this point. And once they did that, they kind of started garnering more support from there. And they kept getting support because Hitler had this really effective way of making specific pledges to each class, and then using those, and then combining those specific pledges with his whole nationalist idea, all of his nationalist policies, and people really, really got behind that. Once again, you can't talk about enough about how key the propaganda was to the whole uprising, and then it mentioned in the book that there were no immediate signs that this was going to lead to the success that Hitler and the party wanted. So you really do have to commend them for the patience and the way that they allowed this to develop over the course of about a decade. So the origins of Nazi support. So everything came about, the Nazi party really came about from the widespread support of Hitler. He just became a very popular individual, and people looked to him to kind of guide Germany out of the chaos. Once again, they moved their primary support system from the from the working class to the middle class, and the middle class was by far the strongest class in Germany at this time. And one of the reasons they had to move away from the working class, because of the unemployment in the country at the time, meant that you only had support from the working class if they were employed. And the way the economy was going, so if your party was in power and people had jobs, they supported your party. But if they didn't, then they didn't support your party. So once the Nazis started to come into power, they lost some grip in the working class, but they still had, a slight foothold there. But Hitler turned the whole idea of Nazism into an ideological issue instead of just a mere political issue. And that's how he really inspired the people to get behind him and the party, because people started seeing this as a revolution and a way to change Germany for the better. Another way he turned it into an ideological issue is he gained a lot of Protestant support from the north of Germany instead of the south, because the Catholics in the south of Germany were kind of set in their ways, and they knew what they believed in, and they couldn't really go on the right wing side with the right wing policies that Hitler and the Nazi party had. So he appealed to the Protestants, and the Protestants really got behind him because they could vote for the National Socialist German Workers' Party without compromising their religious beliefs. And because of this, they really formed a strong foothold up north, even though they were lacking in the south. And so basically, in conclusion, although Hitler sought to gain power as quickly as possible, there has to be some credit given to his patience in allowing the Nazi party to grow through legal means. The delicate state of Germany allowed radical idealists like Hitler to gain support. Hitler was a master of propaganda and knew how to inspire the people and gather their affection. The views of Hitler and his party gave a sense of revolution throughout Germany, and without Hitler, Nazism could not have risen to the heights that it did. And that's it.
All right. Thunderous applause.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none.
With his mustache too, so I'm just gonna paste it over the top.
All right. Our next presentation is.
Does this work?
It should work. Yes. Our next presentation. This is yours as well. Is about chapter 2 in our text. So, go right ahead and begin. Just kind of stand behind the computer and go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Alright, so my presentation's on Wilhelmian Germany. It was a time roughly, the book said 1890 to 1914, but Wilhelm, or William II, became kind of this German emperor in 1888. It was a time of rapid change. You had the Industrial Revolution in Germany. The German, what would you like, states, I guess, before were unified. So they became unified under Bismarck, and then Wilhelm comes into the picture. By World War I, 1/3 of the workforce was farming. Before that, it was primarily agricultural. So you had a big shift in urbanization, industrialization in Wilhelm's time. Part of it was because he promoted it. He wanted Germany to become more of a industrial, working, factory type of nation. And it was also the dawn of a lot of new political ideas. There's a lot of divide in society, partly because of economic growth, different political stances. You had some socialism was rising. Conservative Germany was kind of starting to die off. They were struggling to maintain support. You had liberals, and you still had religious groups, and Catholics were predominant during this time. So those political issues are brought on. So you had this shift between urbanization. People started coming to the city to work in factories. And what this caused was people were able to group up. They would form political groups. They would form organized political. They would group up, and so this allowed them to have more influence because they were in the city. They could communicate. They could converse. They could have meetings, and this allowed different, a lot more clashing between the groups. And as I mentioned, the conservatives were struggling. The old idea of German kind of monarchy was kind of getting competed against with socialism at this time. A little bit about Wilhelm, or William II. He's called by both names. He had a lot of military power, and he became emperor in 1888. And he is considered to be the last Kaiser. And he launched Germany into different foreign affairs. Because Germany was united, they started interacting more with France and England. But because Germany just was a new forming entity, it had a lot of problems with foreign affairs. Wilhelm had a very, his temperament was sporadic. It was very, well, I put on there bombastic. He was just all over the place. He would just make very uncalculated decisions. And it made it hard for Germany to connect and ally with other powers, France and England. As a result of industrialization, there's a lot of different economic developments. Before industrialization, there was a big gap between the rich and the poor, and industrialization didn't really change the gap very much, but it did improve just basic life for most people. They had a steady sense of income. There was a rise in large-scale enterprises, and Germany developed a welfare policy. And that's just a German mark. Pretty sure it's accurate. I had to do some searching, but I'm pretty sure that's from the correct time period. There was Wilhelm did support art. There's a lot of different, mostly militaristic art, propaganda art. They worship. The state, the look of German rulers was important. The stately attitude, the clothing, the kind of this imperialism that would rise up into what happens in World War I, and you get nationalism. And part of it, which I'm going to get to in a second, was brought on by this success, brought on unity from Germany because they were unified. They had a better growing economy. because they had a growing economy, people were like, yeah, this is awesome, we can get behind this. And so it led to a lot of nationalism. There was art. There was one thing I read is teachers, they hang up military medals in the room. They would use that to show how everybody was behind the military. They were all behind what Germany was doing with growing their military and industrializing and behind the state, supporting the state. And then the end of the Wilhelm period goes into World War One. Germany had a lot of pride in their country. Began an international conflict because of Wilhelm's bad foreign policy. He just didn't really handle foreign policy very well, didn't connect with other countries very well, other than maybe Austria-Hungary. And there's a lot of military developments because of the industrial period. And I think I put on the paper, because of the political chaos, are we going to go towards more of the monarchy? We're going to go more towards an empire? We're going to go more towards a socialist view? Everybody kind of wasn't really unified politically. And so some people didn't want peace. They didn't like the direction that Germany was going. And so people believed that there could be never a war again, but then you have World War One because of, well, there's a lot of different causes, but Wilhelm partly had to do with his leadership. So, yeah, that's pretty much the Wilhelm period.
Again, thunderous applause. Do we have any questions? Comments? All right.
I would like to say that he actually did remark a little too late that there was a reason for Austria.
Okay, let's talk about the unification then of Germany. Ooh, we have sound effects as well. That's nice. That kind of wake you up. Everybody seems, I think there's no windows in here. I think maybe we should have everybody stand up and do 10 jumping jacks or something. Not for extra credit. I will not remove points if you do it. How's that? That's extra credit, sort of. If I don't take points away from you for doing it.
Take the points away and then get them back.
I could. I do have a pool of extra credit from all the courses I've taught over the years where people had extra points that is available to me. I call it the treasury of extra credit. Now, to access that treasury, well, I can't say because I'm being recorded, but there might be ways to do that. Okay. I'm always mindful that I'm being recorded. I know the drones follow me all the time. I've been used to that for years. I like to tell people just because I'm paranoid, it doesn't mean I'm not being followed. Think about it. Okay, let's talk about the unification of Germany very quickly. Here's our Kaiser Wilhelm I. We talked about Kaiser Wilhelm II a bit earlier. This guy's got some of the nicest facial hair that you're going to see this semester. Look at those sideburn, mutton chops, mustache combination. Very Wilhelmian I. Well, anyway, we didn't do this last time, right? I was going to do this last time and I didn't, right? You haven't seen this before, right? Okay, that's all I need to know. I've seen it before. I'm just trying to remember when, how long ago. But I went through it because I was going to talk about it last time and then I didn't do it. So let me just talk about this in the time we have left today. We got about 15 minutes or so. Let me just go through a few of these things about how Germany is unified. Germany, as we've already mentioned, was divided into quite a few small principalities, right? That had been reduced when Napoleon came through, from hundreds down to, scores. How's that? But still very divided. And the most powerful of those German-speaking territories is Prussia. Kaiser Wilhelm was really the king. He was King Wilhelm of Prussia. What he wanted to do was to unify Germany under him, under the Prussians. And the only other real possibility that we mentioned last week was Austria. Now, in order to do this, Kaiser Wilhelm wanted to make Prussia very strong. When you think of Prussians, you ought to think of very disciplined people. Very militaristic, you might say. Very regimented. How's that? They're the kind of guys who would be very disciplined, like get up very early in the morning, get everything done, all that sort of thing. Yes?
Weren't the Hessians in the American Revolution Prussian?
Exactly, yes. Here, if you studied American history, then you have studied about the Hessian soldiers, troops. And that is roughly this same period that what we're talking about, just before the unification, right around the time of the unification. Yes?
When you say Wilhelm, it sounds like there would be an L instead of an M. It's not. Right?
Wilhelm. Yeah, Wilhelm. Yeah, you know what? Wilhelm, right? Yeah, Wilhelm. Yeah, there should be an L there, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why you guys took it out of my PowerPoint. Another question over here. Somebody had their hand up. Did you have your hand up? Oh, you were asking about the L. Oh, yes. Well, the Hessians, were, pretty. They became allies of the British during mercenaries. Yeah, soldiers for hire.
When did they get drunk?
Did they get drunk?
All soldiers got drunk.
Well, I imagine there was an occasional Hessian that imbibed to excess. He wants to raise his hand and say that.
I just want to say in that period, all soldiers got drunk. Heck, the British Army gave their soldiers like a pint of rum every day. So what soldiers do when they're not fighting?
Whew, okay. Well, yes, they are German.
They drink vodka.
German. Well, I think German's much more into what I might call beer. But anyway, beer. Well, we have to move on. We don't have much time. Here's our good buddy, Otto von Bismarck. Well, we got all kinds of noises on these. Otto, I went to high school with a guy named Otto. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But it wasn't von Bismarck. He's the only guy I ever knew that was named Otto. Yes.
Are these PowerPoints on my
The videos will be on MyFire. Yes. Yeah, they'll be linked on MyFire, and you'll be able to watch this. Yes. So when the legislature refused to follow, do what he wanted, build up the military, try to let him do what he's doing, then he decides that there's a guy who was very controversial. His name was Otto von Bismarck. A lot of people did not like Otto von Bismarck. He didn't make a lot of friends. But he was the kind of guy that Kaiser Wilhelm thought could get the job done, and certainly he was. Bismarck comes and he's given the task to unify Germany. And this is a task that he will happily take. He wants to unify Germany with what he says will be iron and blood. Of course, he said that in German, not in English. Now, of course, to unify Germany, there's a lot of people that did not want Germany to be unified. They did not want Germany to be unified. People like the Austrians, of course. The Russians, not that interested in it. The French, also. There was none of their best interest for Germany. They liked Germany being divided and rather weak. Okay? So how is our buddy Otto going to do this? He's going to do it like he says, with iron and blood, but he's going to do it with war and with diplomacy. War and diplomacy. And I think the diplomacy part kind of surprised people. The war part probably didn't, because he was, a hard guy to get along with. All right, Otto. Yeah.
That's where the term real politics comes
Yes, realpolitik. Yes, real politics. And that's really the idea that, you're going to use whatever means that you have to accomplish your goal. His goal is to unify Germany. Okay? So, yeah, it's Machiavellian. If you know Machiavelli, his writings, it's a similar strain. And, of course, in the United States history, a guy by the name of Henry Kissinger was known for realpolitik, I think, as well. Well, he's going to use 3 wars. We'll just list them here. 3 wars to unify Germany and unify the German people. Wars can unify people. There's a few things you got to remember if you want a war to unify people. First of all, you got to win. Okay? If you go to war and lose, that's not going to unify people. Secondly, you've got to win relatively quickly. It can't drag on. People do not have a tolerance, long-term tolerance for war. If you make a case, this is why we need to go to war, and then you go to war and you win the war in, let's say, a year or so, 18 months maybe. If you start dragging it out 3, 4, 5 years, then it begins to divide people. But it will unify people. If you say there's really a cause for this. For example, here in the United States, after 9/11, most of you were probably how old when 9/11 happened? Not very old, right? You were 6 or 7. You were what? How old were you? 4, yeah. So you maybe don't remember it as much, but the United States became very unified. Hard to believe today. We're very divided. But at that point, we were very unified. We were unified against a common enemy, against a common concern. Okay? And
Pearl Harbor, right?
like Pearl Harbor, I think 9/11 was similar. Must have been, of course, despite what you think. I was not alive when Pearl Harbor took place. But yes, I think similar. Must be a similar idea. Well, these wars, first of all, against those Danes. Denmark, 1863. There is a territory, 2 small territories on that peninsula that are near Germany. They're called Holstein and Schleswig, where the people there speak German. And of course, the idea is here we want to liberate them. Okay, liberate them from those terrible Danish rule. The Danish have very nice pastries, however. So it might not be bad to be Danish in the morning, but then by afternoon you want to be something else. You don't want to eat pastry all day. Unless it's schnitzel. You could have some schnitzel for lunch. Well, yeah, Vikings. Well, I like the Vikings. They're quite to the point. Well, how about the next war? Because, we're running out of time, and I'm going to try to move along a little bit. We got gunshot fire. The 7 Weeks War, it's sometimes called, or AKA, also known as the Austro-Prussian War of 1865. Okay, so you understand that's right around the time that something's going on here in the United States. I don't know what, but I think something big's happening. Yeah, something, I don't know. Now, some people were reluctant to fight against the Austrians, but, because they both spoke German. However, the Prussians needed to show they were the most powerful. So they go in and crush the Austrians. Now, when they defeated Denmark, they did not take over all of Denmark. They just liberated Holstein and Schleswig. When they defeat the Austrians and they march into Vienna, they do not occupy Vienna for a long term. They do not take over all the Austrian territories. They actually pack up and then leave. The idea here was just to show they could do it. And if you want to go with a winner, if you want to go with the most powerful, you need to go with the Prussians. Okay? All right. Let's see if we can get to our third war. All of this made France kind of nervous, as you might imagine. All right. That's all the stuff on that screen, so let's just leave it at that. Now, this leads to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. France was nervous about all this because, for one thing, Wilhelm's cousin was offered or potentially could have taken over the throne of Spain. Then he would have had the two cousins on either of their big borders, and they didn't like that idea. And so the French wanted to make sure they sent Wilhelm a message and saying, guarantee us that your cousin's not going to do this, that your family's not going to take over Spain and so forth. And basically he wrote back, I can't control everything that my relatives do, but Bismarck edits it and makes it much more threatening. Like, you don't tell us what to do. My family will do whatever they want to do. Okay, that kind of thing. And by editing it, it really makes the French nervous. So they go ahead and declare war. They were the ones that declared war against Germany. This begins the Franco-Prussian War, which lasts a little over a year. And again, a quick German victory. How come? They had things, that's really, they're using the telegraph, they're using railroad, they're using sort of new kinds of techniques that are available to them, and they overwhelm the French, and they force them to surrender at the Palace of Versailles and sign a peace treaty there in Versailles. Of course, the famous palace of the French Revolution will become the site of that. Let me just see what's next. So then Germany is unified. Maybe I can put this up. Yeah. And Kaiser Wilhelm now, through these, becomes the Kaiser of Germany, or the Caesar, the Emperor of Germany. 3 quick victories. Prussia returned almost all the land from France. They kept 2 territories that were disputed, Alsace and Lorraine, which are right on the border between France and Germany. And so we see Germany is united together under the Prussians and established a balance. Then Bismarck turns his attention to treaties. Let's see if I've got a map here. Yeah, let me just put the map up and we'll end with that. Here we see, for example, beautiful Schleswig-Holstein. That's a territory they take. Alsace and Lorraine. And then, of course, they did defeat the Austrians, but they took none of their territory. And all of that sort of pinkish purple color up there then becomes not only Prussia, but now a united Germany in 1871. And that's what Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to disrupt that balance of power. And that's what's going to lead to World War I. All right, we're going to end it there for today.